right.
Well, welcome to Making Sense with Move to Amend. This is the weekly program with a different duo of Move to Amenders and supporters reflecting on the week's news, both the horrors and inspirations, engaging with you and sharing upcoming events and activities. Greg Coleridge here with Ann Fourier. Ann, how are you today?
I am very good. Some hopeful things are happening in the world. Some very screwed up things are happening in the world, as per usual, living in a universe with a lot of corporate influence. But yes, I am Ann. I'm from Eugene, and I am an intern and excited to join you today, Greg.
Well, good to be with you and good to be with everyone who has joined us. Just before we start, Ann, how did you find out about Move to Amend and come to us?
Oops, sorry, quick glitch. So actually, I have to thank my mom because I've been involved in politics for a while and was looking for an internship where I would get to keep learning while also getting to sort of fight inequality. And my mom found you guys, I think via Twitter, and she sent it my way. And then here I am a year later.
A year later, yeah. You've been with us for a year and are one of three now current interns with us, all of whom have just been dynamic, extremely helpful. And just for people who may not know, we just simply, being small staffed as we are and under-resourced as we are, just could not do nearly the amount of work we do without the tremendous interns that we have. So kudos to you, Ann, and the others, Jenny and John, this term with us, and all the interns that we've had in the past. And your support of Move to Amend makes that possible. All right, so before we get started, just wanted to give a shout out to Alfonso, who is sort of in our technical command center, spinning the dials, keeping us on air and sounding clear and the like. So thanks to you, Alfonso, for doing that very important work in the back. And just want to encourage people before we begin to ask questions, make comments. We will do our best to keep track of those and maybe not respond exactly momentarily when they come up, but when we break between an issue or two, we'll try to respond to them. So feel free to make comments. Move to Amend, for those of you who are not aware, is a national coalition that has been around since the Citizens United Supreme Court decision. But our goal is not simply to reverse Citizens United, but to abolish all never intended constitutional rights of corporations, as well as the equally bizarre constitutional doctrine that political money in elections is equivalent to First Amendment protected free speech. We focus on grassroots organizing and education. We particularly feel it's important to work in solidarity with communities that are on the front lines, which means groups that have been and individuals who have been as a category historically oppressed, because they know the best what oppression is like and what it's going to take to overcome oppression and have real, authentic self-determination, authentically, legitimately, for the very first time. And so, we're into political education. That's what this program is all about, coming to you each week to try to discern what's going on and to help us collectively get through where we need to be and need to go. And the last principle I think that's real important to emphasize is that we operate independently, both politically and economically, which go together. Political and economic independence is intertwined, interdependent, because if you are financially strong or dependent on corporations, well-to-do individuals, foundations, political parties, you name it, then they can pull strings or push buttons that can silence or steer you away from doing what you think, what we think, what those we represent think is most important and needs to be done. So being politically and economically independent is extremely important, and your support makes that happen. Okay, so let's get to it. What we're going to do is start with a few things that we each saw this week that relates to corporate rule, money, and politics that particularly we found troubling, came to our attention, pissed us off, whatever the case may be. So,
yeah.
Go for it.
One big thing that was, because we've been recently with another group that I'm involved with, has moved to amend a committee working on looking at corporations and how the Supreme Court has given corporations Fourth Amendment rights. And it's quite extraordinary, all these rights that they've gathered that are purely personal. But then this week, I see that the Trump administration is trying to make it so that people it thinks are Antifa are going to be considered foreign agents. And so there was a special leaked memo that just came out on the 3rd. And basically, they were trying to pretend that people they didn't like in the US that were leftists were somehow like agents of the Kurdish government, which then, of course, means that because these people are not solely Americans, under all of our anti-terrorism laws, you can basically just strip them of all of their Fourth Amendment rights and all of their civil liberties and conduct extensive surveillance on them. And that just that kind of double standard that our modern government has between our corporate creations and then the human beings that these civil liberties were intended to protect is just mind-boggling.
Yeah. And where did you come across that?
That was in The Nation, actually. Huh. So they have a link to the memo. It is quite something.
What's so interesting is that, the antecedents of what Antifa is supposed to focus on is their purpose is to speak out, to expose, and to resist fascism, the elements of which we are certainly seeing in this country. Now, one can agree or disagree with their tactics, with their strategy, but my goodness, the whole purpose of resisting fascism is, I think, that used to be a word, right, not all that long ago, that, was something we should not, on the left, particularly if you are deemed to be credible, should ever utter. But my goodness, with what's going on and how the government is wedding, and what's the real definition of fascism? It's the wedding of the state and corporations. Technically, it's what Mussolini said is what fascism is all about. Man, we are seeing that throughout our government at the federal level.
What strikes me as so ironic in this case is that the crackdown on Antifa proves that Antifa is necessary by demonstrating that we are in a fascist police state. And it's the same thing with police brutality. I mean, like Chad Wolf, the acting DHS secretary, had a hearing yesterday. And I mean, not much came out. It's really frustrating how these hearings have just basically been people yelling at each other. But it's like, I mean, he said, first of all, there's still federal troops in Portland, even though they're having the state police on the front lines in terms of defending the courthouse, and that there's absolutely no regret. Like, they're still defending all of the actions in Portland is completely justified. And it just blows my mind that this is the state of modern America. Right.
And one of the comments that came in, was from Jessica, really good point, that, since Antifa isn't actually an organization, they've been trying to categorize it as some unbelievably well-orchestrated group, of course, with these ties that now go global, because conveniently then it can be labeled as a terrorist organization. But it's laughable in that the group is, not even a group, it's individuals and pretty decentralized across the board, and it's being made out to be just this, bogus grouping that is potentially threatening the national security of the republic.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because if Antifa was actually a registered corporation, even just as a nonprofit, that they might actually be able to get more rights that way, because then it would be harder to go after their members individually, even if you declared them a terrorist organization. Because it's like with the NRA, even though the NRA is so corrupt, I don't think that means the New York AG gets to just strip civil liberties from the individual members of the NRA, even if they've done things that are feeding into the organization being corrupt.
Right. I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around the idea of Trump declaring this group, a terrorist organization when it's not even formally an organization. How do you do that?
Yeah. It makes no sense.
Yeah. All right. Anything more on all of that?
Well, I mean, there was another thing that I was thinking a lot about with the police brutality, which is actually thanks to The Nation again. They published an article about this, but it was already something I'm talking about with my sister, is sort of the intersection between disability rights and racism and police brutality, because like she has type 1 diabetes, and like a lot of instances of police brutality have occurred with individuals who have diabetes, because it's like, if you consider, because like say you're having low blood sugar, that can make someone act weird. It can make someone act like slightly more aggressive, not respond to instructions, or like want to keep an eye on a bag, or have to go in and out of a grocery store really quickly. And so if you combine that with the police predisposition to look at a person who's doing that while Black and assume that they have to be lying, it just creates this toxic recipe for people to be dying in police custody or even while being arrested. And, we're talking about right now with the push to hold police officers accountable, one of the things that's been coming up is the origins of police lack of accountability under the law. And that actually goes back to one of the foundational cases in 1984, being a Black man with type 1 diabetes who was having an instance where he needed, like, I believe he was having an instance of hypoglycemia, and the police just assumed that he must be like on drugs or whatever, and just like threw him to the ground. And so it's a really challenging issue, and something that we should hopefully get some attention.
Well, and there are a lot of people with behavioral health issues that they're dealing with. Maybe the most tragic incident that we've witnessed here that occurred earlier this year, right, was the young man in Aurora, Colorado, Elijah, what's his last name? Gosh, Cummings? No, somebody else.
Elijah McClain.
Elijah Cummings.
Yeah.
Elijah McClain. Just such a tragic situation with him, feeling he didn't want to be approached, and he wore a face mask, just trying to be alone and be by himself, and that was interpreted as potentially something scary because it's different and suspicious, and therefore warranting how police oftentimes act, which is to overreact and not looking at it through the eyes of someone. If he was a police person, a male or female, he or she, through a social worker's eyes, but as a person who is there to sort of enforce the law and display law and order. And that led to just a very tragic situation that resulted in his death. And so we're just seeing this example of brutality go on everywhere among every people of every race, creed, and condition, but also people who were just disabled or differently abled. There's a guy in Columbus, Ohio, who shortly after the George Floyd murder was, causing a ruckus with police. He was throwing something at police, and he was in a chair, double amputee, and he ended up, being thrown out of his chair, and somewhere along the line, his prosthetic legs got detached from his body. And it's unclear whether the police, who were trying to pull him because the protesters, his fellow protesters, were trying to pull him away from the police. And there he was laying on the ground. He got tear gassed and was screaming. And, the video showed, the people around him calling for medical attention. I mean, it's just horrible. Yet to be determined exactly what's going to happen in that case. But, people who are the most vulnerable, right, are always those who seem to, are on the short end of every situation, of every condition, whether it's on the street, whether it's economically, whether it's politically, whether it's socially. So, There's a comment about someone asking, oh, it's Michael Adcock, if someone could make comment about qualified immunity.
Oh, yeah. I was actually going to talk about this a little later, too, because at least one sort of hopeful thing happened on this. I mean, first of all, anyone doesn't know what qualified immunity is. It's what allows, basically, that is what allows police officers to escape any accountability for their actions, because they have to be directly breaking the law basically in a malicious way, and it has to be absolutely clear to everyone that they knew what that law is, and that it would be clear to any reasonable individual that what they were doing is wrong. So, for example, a prison guard got away with this a while ago, of pepper spraying without provocation an inmate in the face. And because the officer did not use all of the bottle of pepper spray, but only a little spritz of pepper spray, they escaped responsibility under the doctrine of qualified immunity. But in this case, which is Jameson versus McClendon, and it came out on the 4th from the Southern District of Mississippi, I believe, Mississippi or Missouri. It is, I mean, yes, the Supreme Court has declined to hear the 10 cases on their desk, but this is one of the first times of a judge just coming out and saying qualified immunity makes no sense. Qualified immunity is practically racist and has to go and be confined to the dustbin of history. So at least maybe there's a trend towards this changing.
Yep, hopefully we're seeing some of the seeds that are being planted in all of these communities to challenge that as part of the larger campaign that people on the streets and are so successfully making through the leadership of Black Lives Matters and other organizations like that, calling for not just any change, but fundamental change that includes funding issues, but also legal issues. And another piece of that, just real quickly, it's somewhat unrelated, but still related in terms of accountability, is there's something called police brutality bonds. I don't know if people have heard about that.
Oh,
but
yeah.
The idea that, so many communities now are realizing, that there's just this pattern of police brutality that's going on in their community, that when, not just if, but when they have to start paying out for their respective police departments brutalizing citizens, that they have to, have a fund for that. Well, where's that money going to come from? It either has to be money set aside in the normal budget, or like what many municipalities do when they, choose to repair a road or rebuild City Hall or do anything else, is they put out bonds, municipal bonds, that are then put out on Wall Street for people to purchase. And people who generally purchase those are like wealthy individuals, pension funds, Wall Street, banks, and the like. And they pay because of the fact that some of these communities, like Chicago and elsewhere, are so brutal to their cities. It means they got to raise a hell of a lot of money for these bonds, which means, by contrast, supply and demand, you got to charge a big interest for that. So these people, and bonds are always paid out. They hardly ever default. So it's a quick way for well-to-do people to profit off of police brutality of, and who, disproportionately people of color. And so, a lot of these big city communities now have got these police brutality bonds that, in the case of Chicago, I think it was like $1 billion that's been paid out so far. And so that's a hell of a lot of money and interest that Wall Street is making off of police brutality.
See, when you're a rich racist person on Wall Street, why bother with that long-term investment in private prisons when you could just make a quick buck off police officers killing people?
Something else. So if you just Google police brutality bonds, I can't remember the organization, but they did a really fine report on it and lifted up several communities, a half dozen communities that are the most egregious in paying out in community settlements, but also paying out in Wall Street. And of course, where that money has to come from then is from taxpayers. So it's another way in which you see the shift from poor to rich, and the income inequality even widening all the more. So just one of many other ways.
Absolutely.
All right.
Speaking of income inequality in a really wonderful way, do you want to give us a quick stimulus update, Greg?
Well, not so easy to quickly do it since there's so many moving parts and so much that's still unknown for people who may be paying attention to this. And it certainly includes all of us on Move to Amend on staff, since we all are at the moment on furlough and getting unemployment insurance, as are over 30 million of our compatriots in this country, and actually rising. As you may know, that bill that supposedly the Senate was going to come up. I mean, they have come up with their version, but now the House and Senate are trying to negotiate a final deadline bill that would hopefully relieve some of the ongoing economic suffering that more than 30 million Americans are experiencing. Today was the deadline that both the House and the Senate established to try to come up with something, and it ain't looking fairly hopeful at the moment. There's differences over added benefit amounts. We have been receiving upwards of $600 on top of whatever amounts states give unemployment per week. Initially, the Senate wanted to give a whole $100, so rolling back from 600 to 100. They have increased that to about 400, but the House is saying, no, 600 isn't really enough, but that was what was contained in the HEROES Act passed a couple of months ago. And there's still differences over supporting educational institutions, whether or not the post office that will be in the middle of delivering votes and ballots come November in a good many cases, whether they're even going to be around and they need money, whether state and local governments are going to receive money to sort of keep afloat, as well as, the whole issue around addressing whether or not businesses, corporations are going to receive blanket corporate immunity or not, and to what extent that's going to happen, as well as, whether there's going to be some effort to modernize the funding for entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, that the GOP has in the worst way been trying in all kinds of ways, through all kinds of forums over many years, been trying to gut and make it means tested or everything else. So all of that is still undecided. Who knows whether any of that is going to happen, whether that's going to happen in a timely way. The issue of the moratorium on rents and foreclosures is still up in the air, although the GOP looks like they're open to that. So, here we are with all of that that's uncertain, all of that that's not been finalized, while just today was issued this jobs report for July that showed we added 1.8 million additional people that is seasonally adjusted. When you add it all together, there's something like 32.1 million people who are right now receiving either state and or federal unemployment benefits of one type or another. That's just an astounding number that are at risk unless something is done. So there's a lot that can be said about this. If people have any specific questions, we can try to, respond to them. There's just all sorts of disparities, while people of color, of course, they are being hurt disproportionately worse when it comes to joblessness. And the jobs report itself, let's face it, is an incomplete picture and an inaccurate picture of the economic welfare of communities, because, okay, you can have 3 jobs and still not be able to earn enough to meet basic living expenses. So that's a very inaccurate picture of our economic well-being. But, meanwhile, while, we're suffering out here, the corporate desperados, they continue to do well. Congress continues to give a green light to the Federal Reserve to just create money, millions, if not billions, if not trillions, out of thin air to give out either loans or to buy up stocks and bonds of banks and corporations, which keeps those stock prices at historic levels. And the stock market continues to be at historic levels. So, if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to ask and we'll try to respond. But The only other thing I'll say about this is, Congress is going to do what they do. The House, in absolute terms, what the House has suggested was insufficient. This HEROES Act, as we pointed out before, is insufficient. But in relative terms, the House Act is much better. The House bill is much better than what the Senate bill is calling for. So it's up to us to try to, for what it's worth, put pressure on our senators. So I ask you, dial 202-224-3121. I'll add it to the comment section, or maybe Alfonso can do it. It's 202-224-3121. That's the U.S. Capitol switchboard. That will take you to, the general place where you can, as long as you know your senators' names, ask them one at a time. They will automatically then direct you to his or her office, and you can leave your comment on, telling them, demanding them that they get a deal done, and that deal be what, holding your nose is what, in absolute terms, isn't sufficient, but in relative terms, is the best we can get at this point, and that's the House bill, the HEROES Act. So call if you can.
Yeah, I saw a proposal out there floated on Twitter that whatever the Congress decides on for unemployment benefits, that should just be what they have to live on until they can figure this whole thing out. But I mean, it's a problem because it's like, we think about it, it's hard to understand in some quarters that this economic pressure that so many Americans are under, first of all, happened before the pandemic. Like, there was a huge majority of American working families that were living paycheck to paycheck, but it also extends so deep. In Oregon, 33% of renters are at risk of missing rent and therefore facing an eviction. And I mean, Michael, you just pointed out that the Federal Reserve Director says we should spend more, and absolutely. I mean, Jerome Powell, there's no special place in his heart for poor people. I mean, he's not saying that out of any kind of empathy. It's cold economic self-interest. I mean, we have to, because the thing is, we're headed into a classic recession. And it's like, if no one has any money to spend, then how are the small businesses that my friends work at going to survive? They're only keeping their heads above water right now because everyone has enough money to go in and buy a little extra thing. But anyway, that's my rant about that. But I mean, you mentioned the stock market doing really well, and it's crazy. Since the beginning of the pandemic, the New York's 118 billionaires have seen their net worth increase by $77 billion. And that kind of discrepancy, while I saw 25% of America's children are at risk of being food insecure, that is what modern America looks like. And it's just insane. And amidst all of this, according to Mitch McConnell, it is not those workers who don't have any protections from getting ill while working in the meatpacking factories. Instead, it's the corporations who insist on oppressing them and forcing them to work through that, who are the ones who need the protections. It's just this utterly bizarre system of who our government is designed to protect. So
yeah, and we know why that's the case, because of the issues we work on, in which people without money, our voices are not heard. The people with money, they've got the megaphones. They are heard loud and clear through their campaign contributions or investments, through their lobbying. And corporate entities, of course, their needs, the big guys, are the ones who have disproportionately been getting the loans, the grants, the tax breaks, the perks, the goodies through the Fed. And, you're quite right that businesses, be they small or even large, can't function without consumers. The consumer economy still represents, 60% of the economy. If people don't have money, well, what are you going to do? I don't care how much money there is to stimulate businesses. Without consumers, it ain't gonna function. So obviously, you just can't give stimulus money forever. But in the interim, where we are in a financial emergency. We are in a crisis, a financial crisis, in which people's livelihood are at stakes. And, don't look now, friends, but food prices are soaring.
Yeah.
I mean, I went to the store yesterday and Jesus, it was like 20% increase on everything, just basically from the week ago or 2 weeks ago. So, people are just being squeezed all the way around, less money coming in, more of it having to go out for basic necessities. Come on, people. And if, we believe that everybody should be treated equally and we're all in this together, well, maybe we should turn the tables. And when you call your senators, ask them, okay, how about you trying to survive on the $400 plus whatever, a average state is giving in unemployment insurance, which is about, I don't know, $330. Go ahead. Yeah. Say for 2 weeks, try to survive on $730 a week. I challenge you, Senator fill in the blank, to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is, and so, okay, speaking of billionaires being exploitative leeches, Daniel Lee asked opinions on the Bernie bill to tax large pandemic gains. Have you looked into this one closely? I actually haven't gone through the fine print on that. I mean, I do strongly support raising taxes on the wealthiest, because those with large accumulations of capital are the ones who, by investing in securities, have been making a killing off the pandemic. I mean, like, for example, an easy thing to do would be, for example, New York's Billionaire Tax, which naturally Governor Cuomo is opposing after getting extensive donations from 43 billionaires in New York, because, of course, it makes sense to cut taxes on luxury yachts and private planes while also wanting to cut $2.5 billion from Medicaid during a public health crisis. But so tax hikes on the very top, absolutely. Any thoughts on this particular tax system?
Yeah, I've not seen that particular bill, but thanks, Daniel, for raising it. It makes, on the surface, perfect gain, because many of the gains that are going to be acquired are going to come from those entities that are involved in doing research development of the vaccines. And, truth be told, is a lot of that front end investment that went into that initial research R&D came from the government. It was public investment that went in early on. And so if private entities are picking up and using that and building on top of that, and then trying to claim all of those gains for themselves, it's only fair. It's only just that some of that be clawed back and some of that be taken back, in the same way that, we have seen some other entities that, that should be. A lot of scientific developments have come initially from scientific investment through the National Science Foundation or other entities that give out grants initially to research all sorts of things that then private business picks up on, and then they want to privatize the gains, and if there's any losses, they want to socialize those. Can't have it both ways. So it makes perfect sense. I see a comment down here from Karen about Eastman Kodak, where, I did read about this. They've got some nefarious connections to Trump. I don't quite know exactly how closely, but I don't think the dots are all that far from being connected, in which they have some connection to a vaccine. And it's a shady bin. Whoops. Looks
yes, I see you froze, Greg.
Eastman Kodak tried to disable us for a second. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or if I'm disabled.
Yeah.
Hello?
No, hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay, cool.
Okay,
yes, I can hear you now.
All right, so something happened for mine. So anyway, with Eastman Kodak, another example of where these entities with political connections are trying to take advantage of the situation.
Well, and I think it's just with this whole idea of a private corporation being able to make a killing off developing a vaccine for a necessary public health crisis, it just kind of hits at a greater issue that I am sure everyone watching this has engaged with, which is the nature of our for-profit health system, because the taxpayers are going to be sinking tons and tons of money. I mean, there's so many grants going on right now to get this vaccine out there. And then who is going to, but now it's just a sort of great speculation that will let those very wealthy that we were talking about gain even more of an advantage. And it's just like this is something that people's lives are relying on, and yet it's also this sort of this game for people to make more money off of, and it just
well, and in the cover of an emergency, right? This is when a lot of nefarious things happen. We are in an emergency. We have to cut through, our friends. I'm sure Daniel has probably heard some of his compatriots on council do this, but it's sort of standard fare that we have to, at a municipal level, to try to get something rammed through city council. Council will declare an emergency. So sometimes that's a way to avoid having, the sanctioned 1, 2, or 3 public hearings. Same stuff goes on at a federal level. We have an emergency. We don't have time. We don't have, the ability to take the time to look through or to do the accountability or the oversight. We have to cut corners. And so that's when there is an oversight. That's when there isn't transparency. That's when then all of this backdoor stuff gets heard and gets handled.
And I mean, you mentioned like a lack of focusing on the fine print and wanting to shove stuff through. You mentioned calling your senators. Even if your senator is a Democrat, even if your representative is a Democrat, I mean, under no normal circumstances would a Democratic bill having major expansion of SALT deductions be completely shoved under the rug. And I think it's very important that as this goes through, we keep holding our representatives and senators' feet to the fire as far as the little details in these bills go. Because even though, I mean, obviously we still want people to support the HEROES Act, even though it has these problems, but under the cover of an emergency, it is easy for parties to push these things through and for us just not to notice them because like there's a pandemic and our elections might be in danger. And I mean, we're in a world where the first foreign planned terrorist attack on US soil, which happened at the start of the pandemic, didn't even make the front page on most news sources. But this is something that we can do as people in a very, very, very flawed representative democracy to try and make it a little bit more just.
Yeah.
But
Yep, absolutely. I see Daniel posted the link to the Bernie bill, so people may want to check that out. And if they think it's appropriate to make mention of when you call your senators as something to add, please do so. I see a comment in here about Dick Durbin and any thoughts on him voting for or against constitutional voting rights constitutional amendments. I don't know whether he's done that or not. If he has, good for him. I know we have tried to approach him on trying to become a Senate co-sponsor of our amendment, the We the People amendment, calling for ending all corporate constitutional rights and money being defined as free speech. And his people have, resisted that. You don't know exactly why. He is like number 2 or number 3 in charge of the Senate. So there is that, hey, the Senate, particularly Senate leadership, has got a lot of strength to corporate America and the like. But I should say that shortly after the banking and financial catastrophe of 2007 and 2009, through that period, that Dick Durbin did go on the radio in Chicago area and said, and the banks, hard to believe at a time when we're facing a banking crisis that many of the banks created, that they are still the most powerful lobby on Capitol Hill, and frankly, they own the place. And what we do then is ever more true now. And this pandemic assistance and the amount of money that's gone to banking companies through the Fed, through getting their piece of overseeing, these police brutality bonds and all these other ways, they always take their cuts. They always benefit. They always seem to profit as everyone else is plundering. So the banks always win. And for all the more reason, Dick Durbin should know better than to realize that, yes, in fact, the banking corporations still own the place. And that includes, in a sense, him and his colleagues. And for all that reason, he should try to liberate his fellow senators and support the We the People amendment.
Yeah.
So maybe we should move on to the next.
Yes. Next topic. I just wanted to add super quickly a great quote on stare decisis, which was that actually from the court case as well, which is if there are any judges out there, a great reminder that stare decisis is not supposed to be the art of methodically ignoring what everyone knows to be true. And to legislators too, you can no longer keep preserving corporate constitutional rights under the guise of maintaining precedent when it is so clear that precedent just does not represent what either was happening then or what is happening now. But let us move on to the next topic with
real
that.
Quick, just real quick, Michael,
yes, sorry.
About the transactions tax, which is kind of in the same realm as the Bernie, what he's proposing, sort of a tax on the already well-to-do. That would be every time there's a financial transaction, there should be a very small tax, like 1/100th of 1%, hardly anything. But because of how Wall Street operates, where they're always playing games, and a lot of these trades now aren't even done by people, but through algorithms on computers, that every time there's a trade, buy, sell, a little bit should go into a government fund that would literally raise tens of billions of dollars, if not over time, trillions of dollars, because there's so much activity on Wall Street and it's way overdue. It's been called for by many people, including Nobel laureates in economics. I think Stiglitz and others have called for a financial transactions tax. I think Elizabeth Warren as well. Many people, progressives, have called for that. It's a slam dunk. Okay.
Yeah. And it's an important thing when capital gains tax is so easy to get around. And you don't have to pay capital gains tax if you're just holding on to your stock. Right. So, yeah.
All right. What's next?
Do you want to talk about Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Because I feel like that is a very important milestone that has happened in the last week.
Well, you go first. I'll get to that.
Oh, well, on this topic or another one?
Another topic.
Okay. Another topic? Yes, we can. Oh, well, okay. Another topic that we were talking about earlier, and that is a very important one connected to some issues of inequality that we brought up earlier, is what is going to be happening this fall in terms of online school. Because I'm going to be at the University of Oregon. My sister's going into high school. She'll be a freshman. And both of us, at least a significant part of our education is going to be online. And in theory, this makes a lot of sense. And it is very important because we should not have people going to school right now. I mean, teachers should not be writing up wills and purchasing coffins before the start of the school year. That is insane. But we also have a huge problem right now because there's, of course, massive inequities in access to especially high-speed broadband internet. And I mean, it's incredibly frustrating because we're in this massive racial reckoning. We're in this massive time of reckoning over economic inequality. And yet what is going to be happening is only going to be making that worse because of lack of access to technology, lack of access to high-speed internet. If we're going to school, massive crowding in underfunded schools. But another big issue is whether or not teachers have the resources that they need in order to convert classes to online. Because I don't know if people have taken online classes, but they are hard to do. I mean, I took French over the summer for a couple of years, and you can't just take your normal class and put it online. And I mean, there are some schools that are saying that they're just going to basically do that exactly, just put their normal curriculum online and then grade it the same as they normally would and discipline kids the same as they normally would. And it's like, and that's just going to be yet another hurdle to poor kids who are going to be doing it on bad internet, maybe typing on phones, not able to print stuff at the library, and having to do work in an area where they're being surrounded by not having space on their own. And I could go on for a very long rant about inequalities in this, but it's just one of those things where it's like, this is just nuts. And I mean, we were talking about earlier, like this, if we had a system where Wi-Fi, where broadband internet was a public utility, then we might not even be having this problem right now. But because it's something that has to be private, that we have to live in a country where people can make a profit off as much parts of our society as possible, now it feeds into these massive inequality in our education system. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, and I think the the drive. Hey, everybody wants to have their kids going to school. All things equal. It's though in this environment, it's not safe, and I think the K through 12 push is just kind of the poster child, the front for the colleges and universities who are really trying to get those online or to have in-person schooling, because that's not really where they make their money. The money really to be made is to fill up those dorms and getting those people on food plans. And a lot of schools, private schools, hey, they're corporations, and they are going to be hammered without kids coming from overseas. A lot of these schools now depend on the full rides coming from students from abroad, and without that happening, or drawn back because it's lethal health-wise to come to the United States compared to many other countries, these schools are really suffering, and many may not make it. So they're doing their darndest and lobbying like hell to try to get these schools, to not do, if they can, not do online, but to open them up and bring those students back.
I mean, Hampshire College is probably going to go under, which is really sad. But and I think it's really interesting because we talk about the stock market, and there's definitely a big inequality in terms of private schools that are coming back as well, because I saw Colby College saying that they're going to be providing extensive in-person coronavirus testing to everyone. And I think many of the biggest, most elite schools have decided to stay home. I know some of the New England liberal arts colleges are doing mixed, but it's like these schools that have massive endowments, and because they have such massive endowments, can hire specialized financial advisors to put their money into unlisted investments with a higher rate of return, even though it's also a higher rate of risk. Those schools are going to they're going to come out of a pandemic fine. But then you have all the rest of these schools that don't have as big endowments, don't have the financial advisors that can help them put those investment capital into the best and most efficient parts of the stock market right now. That's going to be really, really tricky. But yeah, no, it is a big problem in this area. I mean, the University of Oregon is in total. I had a meeting with my student leader the other day. He was telling us that there's the fall study abroad program is still intact, but it's like she seems to have completely forgotten that we can't go study in the most common places that this program sends you, because Americans are literally banned from so many countries because of our country's inability to deal with the coronavirus crisis. So I don't know what is happening with school in the fall.
Everybody can go to Brazil, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Daniel asks about or makes mention of parents that are organizing to avoid school. The parents of well-to-do parents that already have the hardware and software for their kids lined up, and that no doubt is true. I've heard some of that, but there is also the corresponding pushback by some of those same schools that those well-to-do parents send their students to, the private high schools that really want those kids in the classes because it's easier to justify those high tuitions. If you're doing stuff at home, why should I be paying or justifying the same high tuitions? I mean, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law are teachers at private schools in the greater Cleveland area, and they've got the upper crust of Cleveland area their kids going to these respective schools, and they're still trying to figure out how they can do it, how they can try to, and they're dedicated to trying to be open. But there's some pushback from parents, so there's some tension there between the well-to-do schools and the well-to-do parents that normally love those kind of schools.
Yeah, so, there was definitely the irony of Barron Trump now doing school online while his dad was trying to get all the schools that rely on public funding to just murder their teachers and parents. So I guess this is one of the only good things about schools relying on state and local funding.
Absolutely. Well, a word, if we might. This week, as Anne brought up, in fact, yesterday was the 75th anniversary of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. This Sunday will be the same of Nagasaki, Japan. The first two instances where nuclear weapons was ever used, and they happen to have been used not on military targets, but on civilian, which, if done so today, well, which should have been even then considered war crimes, but that was before war crimes, the war crimes tribunals and those international organizations were established. But just under basic morality and ethics, they should have been considered war crimes and beyond the pale, as was considered to be use of chemical weapons on civilians in World War I. I had the opportunity to attend the 40th anniversary observances in Hiroshima, 1985, and among all the comments and suggestions and concerns people had about the fears of nuclear war then, as we need to still be fearful of it today, the ongoing threats of nuclear annihilation, the spending that goes into weapons, nuclear weapons, conventional weapons, how nuclear weapons as well as conventional weapons have been used to further U.S. military empire. And that's not only military, but also there's an economic aspect to that. The sword and the dollar, as Michael Parenti has often said, go hand in hand. And military weaponry and bases and aircraft carriers and all the rest have been shields and have been protective assortments to protect U.S. multinational, if not transnational, corporations. So all of those are worthy of discussion, worthy of critique, and certainly are examples of how corporations have misused and abused the public treasury, not for domestic spending to help meet immediate needs here, but in a sense for a protective army, a public army serving their private needs to force their way into countries that otherwise would not allow them to be, and to plunder resources and take advantage of cheap labor. But what I think is an important lesson among all of those lessons that occurred today and ongoing right up to the present is the lesson that I came into before going, and certainly was reflecting of while there, and have since been mindful of since. And that was something that Einstein said after he saw the bomb happen in the Manhattan Project occur, where he said the splitting of the atom has changed everything save our mode of thinking, and thus we drift toward unparalleled catastrophe. The catastrophe, of course, he was referring to was the nonsensical, mindless belief that we can win a nuclear war, that somehow we can have conflict and that military conflicts can be resolved militarily, which of course he thought would lead to clearly unparalleled catastrophe, obliteration. And that was fear of nuclear war, truly the existential threat of his day and of that era. It still is, obviously, to today. But sadly, that existential threat has been joined by others, environmental and to somewhat of a lesser extent, but no less dangerous and potentially in its own way catastrophic. The social threats that we're all facing with our country, with society, with civilization dividing itself around political issues, religious issues, economic concerns and the like. So there's social divisions, the economic crisis. Forget about recessions, we're talking about depressions, with an inability to have a functioning economy that can no longer exist on a growth model. Growth being good, a economic system based on a GNP where growth can continue forever and ever based on plundering natural resources, and somehow we can just externalize those costs forever and ever and ever, and there will be no environmental problems. All of these threats sort of intermix. Clearly, we have to change our modes of thinking today, and that includes politically and legally. And that's what Move to Amend is all about, to say that we can't monkey around with sort of half-assed solutions that sort of just tinker around, let's just kind of change a public official or two, or, create a better law that seeks transparency around money spent in elections, or let's just have some better regulations. Hey, all of those things we need, no question about it. But it's got to be much more than that. the change we need has got to be in the order of changing our modes of thinking, changing our often, overused term of paradigm, and thinking that we have to shift away from thinking that we can just sort of tinker, to say we have got to shift toward systems of democratic, authentic inclusion, of all voices being heard, of not plundering the planet, of figuring out an economy that works for us, that is not plundering the planet and people, that seeks to maximize profit, which is what capitalism is all about, and a system where we figure out ways. All right, there'll be differences, always be differences, but we can figure out ways of resolving those differences short of cataclysmic conflict. So that's the kind of mode of thinking of change that's required. And in the legal and constitutional, it's, hey, we have got to change. We have got to have constitutional renewal. And certainly the We the People Amendment is a piece of it, but that's not all of it. So that's why we're around. And that's why we hope you'll be connected to this cause. I don't know, Anne, as a younger person, sort of,
yeah,
hey, my generation has screwed this up royally. I apologize to your generation. What do you think of all of this and this notion of changing of the way we think about how we address going forward?
Yeah, you spoke, I really appreciate the things you said, and I agree wholeheartedly about the need to completely change how we think about these issues. And I think that's something that, my generation, we have a lot of flaws. Like we have a long way to go in terms of mobilizing politically. But if you look at what Sunrise is doing, if you look at what Sunrise is saying, I think that summarizes and that represents a lot of what we are feeling right now. And a lot of what I feel right now, because it's for so long, we've just wanted to get through the next election. We've just wanted to get through that one next law. But what I feel right now, and what I think from the people I talk to, what we see is that years and years of just trying to achieve that gradual level of reform, all those hidden provisions of the bills that were that little thing inserted to create the compromise, that's piling up right now and creating a disastrous situation. And you're right, it is time to just completely change how we think about political issues. And but I am hopeful right now, because seeing the people marching in the streets, seeing the change in who we are sending to elective office, like Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman and Rashid Tlaib. These are people who are committed to standing up against corporate power. And these are people who are committed to changing what we do in Congress, and I think this is a big thing, like people were confused. Elliot Engel, he signs on to these progressive things. I believe he was a co-sponsor of the We the People Amendment. Yes. He signs on to Medicare for All. Same thing with Lacey Clay. But we have politicians in Congress who are willing to pay lip service to radical movements while not being willing to stand up and take the tactics of those radical movements to Congress. And I really hope that we can change our political system and make it not just be enough to say the right things, but to actually act with courage and stand up for what is right. And I really hope, because we need that change right now. I don't know what it's going to be like graduating into the post-pandemic economic crisis. I don't know. And when we have, just one more thing, I know we are running low on time, but I feel like one of the things that my generation recognizes so well is how these different issues intersect, because we have the climate crisis. We might all be dead eventually because of rising sea levels and natural disasters. But we also have this economic crisis because there are a lot of people who want to fight against the climate crisis, want to enter public advocacy, but at the same time, when public college costs so much, $37,000 if you factor in, that's assuming you get no financial aid, but the way it works in Oregon, you don't get financial aid to cover the cost of housing. You only get it to cover the cost of tuition, plus like a job system that doesn't support younger people. And it's just, you add all of this together, and it's very clear that we just need to change how we look at political systems. We need to change how we approach political change, and we need to get Congress to feel the urgency that so many people on the ground feel. And yes, Michael, I completely agree. Neoliberal economics has just got to go.
So the change we're talking about, yeah, we've got to, and again, a big emphasis of Move to Amend is political education. We've got to get on the other side of the learning curve of all of these, but, we cannot de-emphasize the psychological change required. Yoga teacher Sally Kempton said, it's hard to fight an enemy that has outposts in your head.
Yeah.
And we have been, outposted by the dominant culture to say, you can't do that. You can't fight this. You can't do that. You're not smart enough. You're not politically connected enough. That idea is too wild. It's impossible to achieve. You can't amend the Constitution. You can't call for radical renewal of change. You can't expect the races to get along with one another. You can't expect to have, people respecting beliefs and the like. But you're absolutely right. People on the street around the racial concern are saying, wait a second, we need transformative change. The Me Too movement, wait a second, we need transformative rethinking of how we deal with the sexes. So that's the mind that is beginning to occur, not just minor things, but transformative things. So.
And Norm, you mentioned no generation being monolithic. I completely agree. I've got friends who think neoliberal economics is the bee's knees, and we need to get people to just have a stake in paying for their health care so that they don't go out and spend all that extra money. So yeah, no, I totally agree. There are so many problems going on right now. So
or you can move to Europe. All right, real quick.
Yeah.
Some comments of announcements, and then we're going to wrap up. So some announcements. I'm going to do 2 of them, and Anne's going to do a couple of others. Upcoming webinars. Move to Amend every month has a webinar. That's one of the ways to sort of get on the other side of the learning curve of how to become a more active and effective change agent. The next one, I'm not sure what the topic is, but it's on August 4th. So mark down on your calendars in crayon now. That's usually at, what time is that? 8 o'clock, I guess, Eastern time. So 5 o'clock Pacific, that's August 4th. And second, let's see what's coming up. Upcoming other activities, 2 of them, all this month in August. Our congressional, assuming they hopefully they come up with a plan that is closer to the House side than the Senate version, they will get out of town and return home. So August is being focused on as a month to reach out to your congresspersons, both on the House side and the Senate side. Do reach out to them, even if it is virtually. Try to do so, but if they show up somewhere, try to safely show up wherever they may be, and that will include over the Labor Day weekend. They may be out somewhere where there's a Labor Day parade or something, who knows, but track that, and encourage them to endorse, support the We the People amendments. Also on August 19th, tentatively, there is a program we are planning on corporate assaults on working people in our communities that is sort of commemorating 2 weeks early Labor Day. So those are a couple of things coming up. Anne?
So one thing that we have that's kind of working on right now is getting a Next Gen caucus up. It's unclear how that's coming right now, but we strongly encourage young people to get involved. And if you know any young people, if there happen to be any young people on this, please let's work together and try and achieve the systemic change that we need. Then the next live report is August 26th at 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern time. And please tell people, sign the petition to get updates. You can do that at movetoamend.org/motion, or you can text amend to a number that forgot to get on this paper. So Alfonso, if you want to put that on the chat super quick, that would be awesome. Yep, the number is up there right now. So text amend to that number. And then, yeah, just the big other thing that is incredibly helpful right now to maintain the staff is to donate. And you can do that at movetoamend.org/donate. So I think that is pretty much it for today.
All right. And if you are able to donate, I appreciate it very much. You would appreciate if you put a number on that check to have multiple zeros at the end of it.
As many zeros as possible.
Well, in that case, that's where we love to see zeros. So we appreciate you sticking with us. Sorry we have gone so long. Thanks, Anne. It was a joy to be with you. Alfonso, thank you so much for spinning the dials behind the visuals here. Join us again next Friday, same time, where I don't know who's going to be on next week, but be surprised. Thank you so much for joining us on Making Sense. Hopefully we made a little bit of sense this week with Move to Amend.
Yeah, thank you again. All right, take care.